For you people watching this in TV land, I assume at most stations now, the first part of these hour tapings we do are made up with, I found out that some of the cable stations are not carrying the whole show at one time, and you've heard me, if you've been watching, refer to Kyroots. And Kyroots, these things are read the first part of the evening, the taping. Most of them is Kyroot. Somebody supposedly writes these, says, and Kyroots said, and it's, then little stories and proverbs and that sort of thing. Like, and Kyroots said, life, you were meant to take it serious. What we are going to start doing tonight, and I'll assume that sooner or later these other cities will end up, if you're that interested, that you'll find the Kyroot parts. But we have started now, going to start, that the people here at our studio, where we're taping this, are making notes that as they're read, tonight there were 95 pages read. Let me see if you see, most of them are short, most of them are one-liners for you showbiz aficionados. And we're flashing numbers. We have a screen over here, and so the people here in the audience, what we're doing now is like taking requests, and people wrote down notes as soon as we got through, which we just got through reading them. They handed them to me. That's me. And they wrote down the numbers that were flashing of the pages that were read of the particular Kyroots that they would like to hear an additional comment thereupon. That is what we're doing. Either that or this is some kind of facade that we're covering up trying to run a numbers game. Which is about time since Reverend Ike, I haven't heard of him in years, for those of you that don't remember that used to would ask you to write him and be sure by Monday because he had a secret special number from the Bible, chapter and verse, and that you should write him so he could get it to you because it was only good for Friday. It would be very good for your soul, very good for your soul. And finally, the FCC or somebody told those clowns in Washington, you realize that man is selling, hot numbers, suggestions to people that are seeing him, what he's saying, send me a contribution, of course. And he said, write for the particular, very blessed chapter and verse number that will be good only for Friday. It will be good for your soul only this coming Friday. And so I must have your letter by Tuesday to get back to you. And he would stress, that's letter, not postcard. You cannot put an offering in a postcard. So at any rate, assuming this is not a front for something else, which I got no idea what it is, hardly a front for itself. So I don't know what it would be a front for. So that's what we're going to do tonight, and I'm just going to, people wrote down page numbers, and I'm going to look and see what we can do, except for the fact that I sit here and listen, and I made some, and hell, I've got too many. So here we go. Are you ready? And we'll just see what happens. Do-do-do, do-do-do. I guess I'll read them back right quick. How's it going so far? No, we're getting there. Don't worry. We'll make this thing fly. All right. And Kyroots said, with the just right and constant use of self-reference, it can become an efficient form of suicide. Kyroots done many of these along the same line. But to say it's done just right, all it really infers is that you're sane, you're ordinary, because as always, assuming this is a front for whatever it is, that is, the front of it's the surface of it, that you can take this being directed like an observation, a retelling of how your own mind, yours and everybody else, works if you're just middle class, middle sane, and then always the kind of inference, the kind of open-endedness of how it might possibly be otherwise, which if you keep watching this and you're not just run-of-the-mill smartass looking for a cheap laugh at humanity's expense, then you hear this not as an attack on ordinary thought, but as the opportunity, the possibility, that where you've been itching all these years, that, hey, maybe you can scratch there. Which if you can scratch there, there is no hostility. As long as you're hostile, as long as you're angry, you'll never be able to scratch, no matter what the context was. So back to this. If it's self-reference, if your thinking is not non-aligned, to pick out the closing Kyroot tonight, which everyone else is thinking is not non-aligned. It cannot be at the ordinary level. It's got to be aligned. If it's political, you got to be conservative, or you got to be liberal, or you got to change every few minutes. It is simply on the basis that it's polarized energy runs a three-dimensional world. So everything you do is self-reference. It's not an attack. The crude forms come out, like in religion, of attacking egoism. A man that was going to try and understand something, somebody who's going to be truly religious would not be egotistical, they would be humble if they were from the Cockney part of our mother empire. But it is not a possibility, it's not an attempt for an ordinary person to say, well, I'll do away with reference to myself. All you got to do is try it yourself. In other words, you're saying, what they're attempting to say is, I'm going to think without thinking that's me thinking. And at the ordinary level, you can't do it because your hormones and enzymes, see, you are already going. I'll put it to you this way. You can forget the idea of John Locke and everyone else that you were born a clean slate. You were born, there was a Kyroot last time that pointed out that everyone's soul, spirit, artistic and intellectual interest is composed almost entirely of stuff. And Kyroots even expanded upon it later and pointed out that all of that is really composed almost entirely of blood and guts. You are born, even ordinary intelligence will admit, you're born with a certain kind of, how do they put it, genetic propensity. Which of course leaves open the possibility that yes, I can be other than I am. Thank you, and good night. You may go to the icebox now, those of you who believe that. An ordinary mind, there's simply no way. You cannot do it theoretical. That's one reason I again suggest that there is a great interest throughout history of certain kinds of drugs, because you can take certain kinds of drugs. It's a fact. And you can believe otherwise as long as the drugs, are like playing your physician and you check with your brain and it says, yes, the doctor is in. Yes, you're still high. Yes, you're still somewhat addled, more so than normal. And you can believe that, hey, I will change. They don't even have to take those fine mushrooms that you people grow along with the dates out in Arizona. Now, you can do it, stay up 2 or 3 days without any sleep. Drink 14,000 cups of coffee. And you can think, well, I've had enough of me being me. Well, of course, there's a cheaper way, as I assume most of you know. It's known as, the certain forms of benzodrines and amphetamines, I mean. But you can go, well, I'm sick of it. I've had enough. I better get some sleep tonight. But by God, tomorrow, I'm changing. Or, those of you that prefer to, you can think, well, I have been dumb. I have been crude. I have not followed my muse. I have not tried to rehabilitate the wounded child in me. And by God, well, I can't go change my life now. I'm a little high, so I'll let this wear off. I'll get a good night's sleep, but by God, in the morning, you cannot do it. I hadn't forgotten this. When you constantly and just right, and if you're ordinary, just right is superfluous because that's the way you do it, that you engage in constant self-reference. That is, you believe that what you think is what you think. As long as you do that, it can become, as Kyroots put it, an efficient. And may I say for Kyroots, since I will admit to you people publicly, sometimes I participate in having him write some of these. Efficient, and may I say pleasant, form of suicide. That is, you will stay right where you are. 1 down and 200 to go. Which is interesting since there's only 95 pages. All right, 17. Let's all pretend that these are unrelated, or if you like, pretend they are related. And Kyroots said, he gave Mr. Optimist's tip for the day, one of our new characters. Mr. Optimist says, non-existent, quote, external authority, which we've been referring to that, external authority of all shapes. It's always institutional. For those people in Mississippi, the epitome For the rest of you who may be semi-literate, the epitome of external authority is normally religion or God. But Mr. Optimist points out, he just goes ahead and gets to the heart of the matter, non-existent external authority, which is what it is from a more complex view, will forever expand to meet man's growing needs. Now see, that is the benefit, and I'll assume that you people understand it's not an attack on religion or any of man's institutions. But there's another Kyroot tonight that points out that the secondary world, the unique, singular world of man, which is his real reality nowadays, as we were talking about last time, the secondary world to a sophisticated, civilized, sane man, the secondary is really more real than the primary. That it's more important, and it's supposed to be. It's more meaningful to dine than it is to eat. It's more meaningful to be in love, or at least have handcuffs and a leather mask, than it is, just to screw, to just engage in sex. But a secondary reality cannot exist unless at the heart of it is pretense. Nothing wrong. But you've got to understand, the human mind's been playing around with this for years and years and years and years, but if you're not aligned, then you don't care. You don't take sides, but to see that in a real sense, comfortably speaking, compared to eating, sleeping, being hit by lightning, then the arts, music, literature, religion, personal relationships, they're imaginary, relatively speaking, because you can live without them. Which is why we've been using the terms the necessary world or the primary world. Necessary world is more direct. There's the necessary world and there is the secondary world. The whole point being that you literally, physically could live without the secondary world. No matter how civilized you might be at this second, you can surely see all it would take is if you could still be lucky enough to find a hospital that would perform such, if you could have a nice frontal lobotomy. You would no longer have to spend money on buying CDs, your stamp collection, dressing up, going to the hairdresser. You could take all of the civilized world that makes man man, as opposed to a hippo on his back feet, on two legs, and you could live without it. Hospitals, there are people laying in hospitals that are alive. There are people, even in a sense, walking around, they're not just hooked up to life support systems. They've had certain brain damage. No matter what they call it, that's what it amounts to. They're somewhere above the midbrain. They have run into, shall we say, a bad stretch of road. But you're still alive. They may look relatively healthy. They may eat. And I guess they get engaged in sex. I mean, I don't want to get close to them, but I guess they can. But you can live just on the basis of the necessary world. All right. So the external authority to which we've been referring, the external authority, such as the church, or your cultural mores, if you grew up in a less homogenized society than the United States, if you're somewhere that your culture, your religion, that there was one single overriding culture, religion, a great sense of nationalism or something, that was your external authority. Even though from a more complex view, even though it doesn't exist, and sure it exists just as much as Jehovah and Allah and the arts, just as much as symphonies, just as much as love. But in another sense, it does not exist because you can live without it. People did live without it. You could not live without it now, but you could live without it. You just wouldn't be a person anymore. So, this external authority, it also is non-existent. It's what Mr. Optimist starts out. The non-existent external authority. So even though it doesn't exist, notice this though. He points out, it will forever expand. Even though it doesn't exist, it will expand to meet man's growing needs. So, if I may interpret, since I may have had a hand in writing this one, you've got something that doesn't exist, and you've got man's needs for it. This thing that doesn't exist in one sense. And man's need for this non-existent thing does not just simply stop at one place. His need for this non-existent thing continues to grow. That I need more and more of it. Which is not some cockeyed theory, by the way. Everybody knows this in their own way. You take up something non-existent, drinking. If you've got a propensity to alcohol and enjoy it. I mean, enough to where, well, yes, I'll have a drink. I'll have one every day. And then you think, well, hell, I hate my job. I'll start having one in the morning, so just at night. It's so much fun at night. All right. It is known, I believe they call it such things as addictive behavior and all that. But it's true with the arts. It's true with a hobby. Well, I'll collect 2 or 3 stamps. I'm between wives. I don't have anything to do. I'll collect 2 or 3. And if you find yourself interested, you know this. 2 or 3 won't do. So you've got a need for something that does not exist. That is not absolutely necessary for life. And once you start it, which if you're alive, you started it. You know, it's like, well, I've got to have a car. Well, I know more or less you do. But you do understand, you do not. This country, even the United States, is filled with people who do not own automobiles. But you can say, well, I got to have one. All right, you got to have one. So you get one. You start off with something like God intended, a Volkswagen Bug, back when they made good cars. But is that going to do? Nah. Get that half paid for and you know what. You want a damn Scirocco or an Audi or an Audi or whatever they are. Once you have begun, and if you're alive, you've begun it, that you need all of the unnecessaries, which is, I haven't changed it from external authority to Volkswagens. Once you have the taste, and if you're alive, you've got it, for the non-existent, your taste increased. Well, sex got so free and available, I had to start tying up my sex partners. And then that got pretty good. But then I had to start blindfolding them. And God knows, I don't want to go any further. I was trying to figure out something to get your attention. It is that in the secondary world, that which is not absolutely necessary, once you start in whatever area you're interested, it expands. But Mr. Optimist, Mr. Good News Man, points out to you not to worry. Because the non-existent secondary world continues apace, in fact, in front of you, no matter how fast you march. It is always right ahead of you, expanding. It's like opening up its arms saying, welcome home, and there is no home. And you're not going anywhere, but it's like the merry-go-round, the faster it goes, and you begin to spread away from the center. It's like the center keeps hollering, I'm right with you. Be right there. All right, that's page 23 down. Well, that's interesting. Oh. Going again to that. Well, here's one. I assumed if somebody doesn't remember. Well, this really will take too much time, but it was tonight. A woman says, ever since your recent story regarding ministers with bookmarks, I cannot pass a parsonage or rectory without a certain sense of uneasiness. I'm not sure I want to get too far into this, but it was a few nights back. See, it's what this was referring to, was a mother sent the daughter off, put her on the bus to the city, and when she opened up her sandwich, inside was a note that said, so what was it? At any rate, the end of it was telling about the attitude toward other people, but the presentation sounded as though it was based upon a sexual comment, and it said that the gist of it was that there was as much danger trying to take the city serious as there was to trust a minister with a bookmark. And I know, in fact, the original might have been even more oblique than that. And I'm not going any further except to point this out. Consider, and taking minister and religion and all that and holy books, which are external authorities, take it to the extreme metaphorically. Consider a minister with a bookmark. That is, a man dealing, a serious man dealing with serious, the epitome of external authority, that is religion. He's not just fooling around. The man's got a goddamn bookmark. I mean, he's got the Vade Mecum. He's got the ultimate word in external authority, and not just fooling around. I ain't talking about one of these cheap TV preachers that slams his Bible around and doesn't know where he is and can't remember what he wrote the other 2 or 3 days ago. I resent that. The man has a bookmark. You don't consider, you can't see the danger. If you're a non-aligned thinker, if you are not tied to what appears to be this external authority, and you meet a man and I just use minister because that's always the easiest. I could have tried to pull a politician, but the politicians really have no comparable physical source of authority such as the Bible, which gets most of the people in the Western world, or I throw in the Koran. But consider somebody dealing seriously, which if he's not serious, he is not a minister or a priest, he is not a man of the cloth. He is not just fooling around with this. The man has a bookmark. You understand? That should frighten any young girl or boy on a bus. Once you get in the city and realize that man's not just coming at me waving a Bible. Son of a gun got a bookmark. I mean, he don't have to tell you he's serious. He doesn't have to tell you he knows what he's doing. He has a bookmark. A word to the wise. All right. We're moving along. Don't worry. We're doing fine. I say that, why should you sweat it, when I realize that we're 2 years behind the first night. No, we're doing great. Do-do-do. All right. And Kyroots said, in a sense, a revolutionist does have one enemy, since I keep pointing out that real thought, revolutionist thought, non-aligned thought, you got no enemy. You're not against religion. You're not against any religion. You're not against all religion. You're not against any political party. You're not against anybody. Which is all a secondary manifestation. We're not talking about physical, because even I would suggest it would not be unusual, it would not be even questionable at the primary level if someone came up, regardless of their race, creed, or color, and kicked you in your privates, for you to kick them back. Or maybe leave. That is not what we're talking about. You understand? If somebody tried to stab you, I'm talking about with a real knife, actually came up and tried to stab you, I would not really consider that you're much of a thinker if you didn't try to get out of the way, whether you tried to stab them back or not. But that is not the kind of opposition that we're talking about. In a sense, revolutionist does have one enemy, but not at that level. We're talking about secondary enemies. These imaginary enemies, in the same way of imaginary authority. That is, people whose thoughts, as dumb and preposterous as they are, have gained some credence enough that you heard about it and you think, Jesus, what's the world coming to, etc. And so, between Kyroot and you and me, we've all kept pointing out, revolution doesn't have an enemy. Not at that level. But here, flash, Kyroot says, he admits, a revolutionist, all right, does have one enemy. Anything you already knows. See, some of these are easy. They are. Here we go. Page 36. See, plus this is kind of like Christmas or something. I see the number and I wonder, well, I wonder which one that'll be. Well, I'm not sure about when somebody, unless this was, some of these I got to admit, I'll speak for Kyroots, some of them, when they're read, it gets hard to hear sometimes, I know. Of course, many of you who read them, you know sometimes when you read them, they're hard to hear. A rebel's version of anything the collective thinks about. I know it's a sticky sentence, you understand? If you take anything that the collective thinks about, the Kyroots went, a rebel's version of anything the collective thinks about to the revolutionist will eventually end up stripped down, jacked up, sitting out in the rain in his front yard. I'm just assuming that somebody thought they heard something that was hard to make out, because it is, well, you understand, if you take anything out here in life, anything the collective has already thought about, not that it's wrong, but let's say that you heard it, and there was another Kyroots, nobody asked about it. And Kyroots said, what the collective knows is interesting. It's a waste of time, but it's interesting. Well, it's interesting one time through. Look out the window. Remember, there's another Kyroots. The revolutionists don't look out everybody's window once. Second time, you're sitting there with them in the cobweb. So looking out their window is almost anything that humanity thinks about. If you're really hard up, you're between the post office not open, you no new stamps, and you got nothing else to do, then you can pick up a magazine, a book, or just anything that humanity has thought about. I mean, you look up and there's a skywriting plane, you know, special ladies' night at Big Al's Saloon. Whatever it is, if humanity has thought it, the collective thinking of humanity, if they thought it, it's interesting. Once. If you're hard up. The rebels' version of anything that the collectives have thought about. If he thought about it and recalled it at all. The rebels' version of anything the collective thinks about, has thought about. To the revolutionists now will eventually, to him, end up stripped down. I'm assuming, maybe some of you people are not southern enough. It will end up stripped down, jacked up on blocks, sitting out in the rain in his front yard. Think about it. Well, that's old things about in the South is how can you tell a real rich Southern guy? And he's got 2 cars jacked up in the front yard. Which there's an additional one after that Kyroots, I think, made up. But it got wind of shock. He left a farm down in Alabama or Georgia somewhere, about 22, 23 years old, and got on the street and almost had a heart attack because the first time he got to the highway, he was going to try to get into town, and he saw a car actually moving. Think about it. If you'll think about a car as being something else, think about car as being civilization. The man left the primary farm, and he's used to seeing, in a sense, the primary world. He grew up. Cars jacked up in the front yard. They were like plants. It was like a hippo looking at water lilies. And then he tried to be civilized. He decides, I'm going to leave home, and he goes down the dirt road he's never been out before, and he gets to the highway. And here is something that had been primary, in a sense, inoperable. Well, literally, but to him was just background. It was a primary, and suddenly here goes a car flying by, and the man has a heart attack. You know, what the hell was that? It was primary in motion in a different way. It was the old, at the center of the universe, of his universe, the merry-go-round, expanded to the point that the thing is taking on a different life. And of course, if you're already civilized, you can say, well, if that was true, you know, I can look down my nose, I can laugh. Because what did he think a car was? You didn't have to think what it was. You're back to goods and services. If you just see it there, it's goods. It might as well have been a rock. You didn't know it moved. You didn't have anything to compare it to. And then he sees one move, and to him it's like it could have been from another planet. It is something completely beyond my comprehension. May I suggest that there is, in you, a Mississippi farm. Things you already know. You're just used to it. That's your one enemy. If it's anything you already know, you go back and look at it and say, well, I just can't abandon my feelings, my thoughts, my opinions of, let's say, religion, or the need for close family ties. Sometimes I worry about it, or sometimes I think I hear things on this program or in Kyroots that sound as though it's some kind of, at least, vague attack. But I can't just abandon that. I know. But if you thought it once, you might as well abandon it because you don't know it, but that's an enemy. Think about it once. You've moved the car off the jack, off the blocks, and you saw it move for the first time. What are you going to do after that? If you take my little made-up story, then you're going to have to say, well, the guy was stupid. And it shows how unhip, uncivilized that he was, that you're saying he almost had a heart attack when he walked out there on the highway, and he couldn't believe it. Here's something that it was like you going out and seeing a boulder suddenly fly down the highway with people in it. And you can say, well, the man was amazed. That's not the half of it. From a more complex revolutionist view, the real amazement is the next time that he would even notice it. Which is what you do when you think about something twice. To say, well, I can't abandon this because I'm still trying to unravel it. Well, again, at least you'll save money buying those damn stamp books because you got a hobby. Well, no. Sometimes I wonder if, and then fill in the blank, religion, politics, social structures, anything you want to pick out in the secondary world. You can say, well, sometimes I wonder about so-and-so, or I think maybe perhaps I take it too seriously, but I can't just drop it because it's obviously too intertwined with the actual soul and spirit of man. So maybe I'll file it away and I'll return to it and think about it. Dogs do that when they throw up. Well, do. So, what I was saying, back to one more time, a rebel's version, that is, once you can see what the ordinary world is, once you can see what your thoughts about it were, once you can see that all of your thinking thus far was made up mostly of stuff. Most of what you thought had a very close connection, many times, to your own hormones and enzymes. Many times it did, trust me. A rebel's version of it would be, see, I've kind of reversed the story, or it was reversed to start with. Once a rebel looks at something, no matter how magnanimous, how great, or how teeny and small, if the collective has already thought about it, a rebel's version of it would be that he's kind of abandoned it. That if he did go back and look at it, or you ask him, what do you think of so-and-so? What it amounts to is his version is now stripped down, everything worthwhile is taken off of it, you understand. I mean, even a redneck from Alabama is not going to leave a nice car out there on blocks in the rain if the radio still works. Take it out. Hook it up to Aunt Martha's hearing aid so she can pick up New York. Take out the seats. We'll use them for day beds when we have guests. Drain the oil. Uncle Hubert's bad leg. In other words, it will be stripped of anything worthwhile, which would be a rebel's attitude toward religion, politics, literature, the arts. So his version of anything that everybody else has already thought about, if he's still got it, which is in him somewhere, the electricity, the chemicals are still there, but it is now sitting out in his front yard, in the rain, stripped down, up on blocks. That's it. Then somebody say, what have happened to your interest in so-and-so? And you can point, well, there it is. But you used to like that. Well, I didn't throw it away. There it is, because you can't throw it away. It's in there. But hell, now it's stripped down, it's rusted, it's out there on jacks, on blocks, and somebody says, well, I thought we had a common interest. I used to really be interested in that. You can say, well, hell, welcome to it. Go sit in it. So we're out. Well, we're out tonight. But my God, hell, we got to, I'm estimating we got to about 0.4 of 1%. Well, will that stop us? But then the question is, next time we tape, will we start here, or will we start all over? Or will we pretend that tonight didn't happen? And then next time I'll start all over that tonight we're going to read and ask for... Let me get the pacing going. Let's try that, see, we'll do it faster. So, based upon tonight, if this is any indication, then from now on, what I'll have to do is what? Give each one, we had 30 minutes, right? We had 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we'll give each one what? 2 minutes. That's more like it. You got to admit that beats long sermons or these lengthy harangues when you go to a political rally. And it sure as hell beats taking economics. Good night. Or if you're watching in the daytime, good night.